Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to look at a huge Kobold Press bundle that is going on right now. The new Drakkenheim Daggerheart Kickstarter has launched, as has Apocalypse World Burned Over, a new Apocalypse World Kickstarter. There's also interviews with Meg and Vincent Baker and Jonathan Harper on reading D&D Aloud. There's a great interview with Shannon Appleclein on Mastering Dungeons, who currently has a crowdfunding campaign for Designers and Dragons from Evil Hat. There is a flickering candle, a little candle. One of the little candle on whether or not Wizards of the Coast is being a good steward of the hobby was flickering, and now it's bright again. And we're going to talk about that. What's the bright candle that just lit? There's new adventure books coming out from Free League for The One Ring and Lord of the Rings 5e. I'm going to share my experiences having used Dreadful Blessings in lots of my games recently. And we're going to cover more questions from the Patreon Q&A. All today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. Last week on slyflourish.com, I published the article 3 Alternative Initiative Options. Just in case you wanted to get some other ways of doing initiative, we have an article up on slyflourish.com that you can go read. This was also delivered out to those who subscribed to the Sly Flourish newsletter last week. You should subscribe if you haven't subscribed. There's a link in the show notes. It's absolutely free to sign up. You get articles like this sent right to you. And this was also, I also did my readings and reflections where I talked about this article and also gave some background and details and thoughts about other initiative options and other games and how they're doing initiative and things like that. That is for hero tier subscribers to the Sly Flourish Patreon. Next week's article is Mashing Up the 8 Steps, something I've been thinking a lot about, particularly in looking at the new Dungeon Master's Guide's adventure summaries that it has. And now we've seen more adventure summaries like those in the Forgotten Realms Adventures in Faerun book. So I talk a little bit about how you can maybe sometimes shrink your notes down by including one step inside of another. This article will be up on the website. It's probably already up on the website if you're listening to the podcast or watching the YouTube video. It will also be emailed out to those who subscribed to the Sly Flourish newsletter. Again, you should totally subscribe. There's no reason not to. It's absolutely free to sign up and you get articles like this sent right to you every week. And I will be doing a readings and reflections on Thursday for hero tier subscribers to the Sly Flourish Patreon, talking more about this idea of mashing up your steps and how does that work and where does it not work? Where do you not want to mash up your steps? Are you actually avoiding some of the things that are advantageous to separating your steps? That's part of the topic. So all of that is on slyflourish.com. Next week, for patrons of Sly Flourish at the hero tier level, I will be publishing the Dread Necropolis. The Dread Necropolis is an adventure toolkit, sort of an adventure location toolkit for the City of Arches, but reskinnable for any fantasy role-playing game and reskinnable to any location that you want to run it in. But it was originally written as one of the higher level zones in the City of Arches, particularly part of the Return of the Nameless King campaign arc in City of Arches. It's a big one. It's about a six-page guide, very similar to the Summervine Villa and the keep scenario that you can find in the City of Arches book, where it talks more about the location, offers secrets about the location, monsters that are wandering around, NPCs you might run into, the locations outside and below the keep. So it's a big area. I ran this one for my home group. This was a big sort of arc for my home group. So it can fill up 3-4 sessions of material. Covers all of the different locations that exist there, treasure, and including an intelligent sword wielded by the main boss of the place. So this is not an adventure. It is not sort of a step-by-step thing where you just grab it and run. The intention of this is to give you a lot of material that you can use to build out your own adventure set in the Dread Necropolis, which is kind of a tier 2 or tier 3. So think of it from like 11th to probably it's a tier, yeah. You could run it late tier 2, so like the 8th, 9th level-ish of 5e, into probably mid-tier 3, 14th, 15th level by changing out the monsters. But that thematically, that's really where it fits. So really fun. The idea of a fortress that the Nameless King used to invade other worlds. It can actually teleport from one world to another and then serve as a base of operations where they can animate dead all around it. They can summon demons and then send them off to attack. So that is the Dread Necropolis. The Dread Necropolis is going to be available to hero tier subscribers of the Sly Flourish Patreon. I will be sending out the note for it next Wednesday. So you'll be able to get access to that. It includes the maps separate so that you can use them in a virtual tabletop as well. So I'm in a funny spot for my games. I have 2 games that are both ending, more than a year long, like 18-month long campaigns within like a week of each other. I have been running a D&D 2014 game. This is kind of every other week, about twice a month that I've been running this game online, called the Black Cathedral, which was a huge expansion upon the Shadowed Keep of the Borderlands adventure written by Raging Swan. I loved Shadowed Keep of the Borderlands, and I grabbed it and ran I think it's about an 18-month long campaign, 40, I don't know, 30 or 40 sessions. A lot of material. That group has hit 15th level. They're in the final, I think we're going to have the final battle next session. And then that one is over. In the meantime, I've also been running my weekly Wednesday, what I've been calling my 3x5e game set in the City of Arches. This is the whole, I've been actually running 2 of the campaign arcs kind of on top of one another. The Key of Worlds arc, which we've now finished some time ago, and the Nameless King arc, which is now at its final conclusion. Really interesting situation. And we'll talk about this when we talk about my experiences with Dreadful Blessings, because sometimes you don't want to use them for the arc of the story. Knowing when to use them and when not to use them is really important. But we are closing in on the end. I think we're within 1 to 2 sessions of finishing that. The characters are 20th level. They just hit 20th level, and they are now headed into the realm of Chul, the abyssal realm of Chul, where Abraxas, the demon prince of Chul, has been killed by a fallen celestial named Vriss. So the characters are going to go into Chul to face Vriss. Vriss has a scepter, and inside the scepter is the last remaining shard of the Nameless King, who was killed in 3 turns because one of the characters hewed off his head with a Vorpal sword. And I thought that is so cool that we're going to go with it. And everyone at the table was shocked. They're like, we have been facing this guy for 50 sessions, and now in 3 turns, he got 1 meteor swarm and then his head was hacked off. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And the characters had already had a big fight. But we're going to talk more about that when we talk about when and how to use Dreadful Blessings. Could I have used Dreadful Blessings to get rid of the Vorpal attack? I could have. Would that have been lame? I think so. And I think people are going to remember it more, that the characters went up to this overarching villain who had prepared himself all this time, who had done all this stuff, and whack, off went his head with a single blow of the blade. So pretty cool. So for that game, this is my Wednesday game, we are probably going to be switching over to Dragonbane for a short campaign. I want to run a short Dragonbane campaign for my Wednesday group, and then going into Shadow the Weird Wizard. For my 2014 game, we're going to be switching over to Daggerheart. And one of the requests I got from the players was, hey, let's have something a little bit more lighthearted than like hunting down demon princes in the depths of the abyss and these black monoliths and the Black Cathedral and all this kind of dark, grim stuff. And I said, okay, how about the Beast Feast campaign? The Beast Feast setting that they have kind of in the Daggerheart game. So yesterday, Saturday, my day off, I was spending a fair bit of time thinking about how I want to run and how that's going to play out, and reading about it and coming up with other ideas for it. So I think that's going to be really fun. So I will talk about what it was like. And, I will certainly, that is not one where I do like a prep show for it, but I will talk a lot about what my experiences prepping for and running a Daggerheart campaign using one of their adventure frames, or the campaign frames, which was the Beast Feast campaign frame. So lots going on in my gaming world, right? I have right now, I have 3 high-level 5e games, and then I'm going to branch out from all of them and kind of switch into trying other systems again. I want to kind of branch out and play some stuff that isn't 5e and see how we feel about it, because we've been playing a ton of 5e recently. Like, between my 3x5e campaign, my 2014 game, and my Tales of the Valiant game, I've got a lot of 5e, and I love 5e. All right, 5e is really, I love it a lot. But I'm also really eager to try other things too. So that's what's been going on in the world of Sly Flourish. We have some interesting stuff going on. So there is a huge Kobold press bundle. I have not heard of Fanatical.com, but Fanatical.com apparently also, oh look, they use cookies, reject non-essential cookies. So Fanatical.com apparently also has book bundles and role-playing game bundles. And there is currently what they call a Dark Fantasy in the Shadows bundle, which is fulfilled by drive-thru. So that's great. You'll get all your access to all these through drive-thru RPG. There are multiple tiers, but I wouldn't worry about tier 1, 2, and 3, and I would worry just about tier 4. Tier 4 is $20. Costs you $20 for 37 products. These are Kobold Press products. $300 worth of products for $20. And it is a total of 37 products. However, there's a lot of small products that are inside this bundle. So don't grab that number too tightly and think, wow, what a great deal you're getting. Instead, I would focus on the specific books that you're getting here. And these are all Kobold Press based books. So there's a fair number of Warlock style books and Warlock accessory books, which are very cool. But then there's some big books. 12 Peculiar Towers is a book that has a bunch of different sort of tower-based locations. We have several issues of Warlock magazine that are here. The full Creature Codex, which is a great big book of monsters. Creature Codex Lairs, which is a book of adventures set using the creatures from the Creature Codex. Empire of the Ghouls, which was one of my favorite campaign settings. I really loved Empire of the Ghouls. I ran this for my Wednesday group as well, and we loved it. I highly recommend it. Tales of the Old Margrave, which is a series of adventures set in an ancient forest, kind of disparate adventures set in an ancient forest, but also a really good setting guide for this really kind of cool old primeval forest that's around there. So that's a really good book. There's a player's guide for that. Courts of the Shadow Fae. A lot of times people want to have sort of Fae-based games. Dan Dillon and Wolfgang Bauer wrote Courts of the Shadow Fae. That is bundled in here. Demon Cults and Secret Societies. You can imagine that is a book that I really like, and really I have used Demon Cults and Secret Society a lot. It's a really, really good Kobold Press book. I love it a lot. That when I saw that in here, I was like, whoa, this is really good. Underworld Lairs. So a bunch of different settings. This, I think, came out with the Empire of the Ghouls book when that came out. A bunch of different lairs that you can run as part of Empire of the Ghouls. Eldritch Lairs, which came out with another book that they put out. I don't remember which one, but that's another book of lairs. I actually wrote one of the lairs in Eldritch Lairs. Streets of Zobek, which is a good guide to Zobek. There is now a much larger Zobek source book that is not included in here, but if you're looking for kind of adventure set in Streets of Zobek, that's there. So I think that this bundle for $20 to get Eldritch Lairs, Underworld Lairs, Demon Cults and Secret Societies, Courts of the Shadow Fae, Empire of the Ghouls, Tales of the Old Margrave, the Creature Codex Lairs, and the Creature Codex. I think all of those books together, if you do not have them, and 12 Angry Towers, I like to call it 12 Angry Towers, but it's 12 something towers. What is it called? 12 Peculiar Towers. I don't know why 12 Angry Towers amuses me. If you want to pick up all of those, plus all this other stuff that you get, $20 for this is a really, really good deal. So if you don't have any of these Kobold Press products, and particularly the ones that I mentioned that you want to look at, check out the Dark Fantasy in the Shadows RPG bundle on fanatical.com. You can find a link down in the show notes to pick it up. $20 is a lot of material for you to be able to pilfer to use in your games, many of which I have used and used quite thoroughly and like very much. The Drakkenheart Kickstarter, as we refer to it, Drakkenheim, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, a setting by the Dungeon Dudes, was put out probably a few years ago now. And I did a big spotlight on Dungeons of Drakkenheim and talked about how much I really, really like this setting book. I have not had the chance to run it myself, mostly because in all of the circumstances and opportunities where I would run it, we ran something either similar to it, or we wanted to kind of get into, the idea of sort of a grim fantasy city setting. Didn't really gel with the groups that I wanted to run it with. But when I did my spotlight and having read through it, and from experiences that other people have shared with me for those who have run it, they really, really loved it. I thought it was a very good example of a book written by GMs for GMs, right? That it felt very actionable, very usable at the table. I really, really liked it. And they are now doing a new Kickstarter campaign for a version of Dungeons and Drakkenheim built in the Daggerheart setting. So if you're eager to use Daggerheart, if you want to switch away from 5e or try something other than 5e, and you were looking at playing Dungeons of Drakkenheim, then this looks like an outstanding Kickstarter. It'll be out next year, so this is kind of one where you want to plan ahead on when you're gonna run it. And as always, Dungeons Dudes is partnering with Ghostfire Gaming, who is kind of fulfilling the whole thing. And as you can imagine, there's tons and tons of stuff. There is a downloadable one single click which, that's my thing, right? Don't make me work to get your free sample, and give me a free sample that shows me the quality of the work that you're going to do. And in this case, and what I really like, something that I do myself in my own Kickstarter campaigns, but they did here, is I love to give people something usable, like not just a sample of the work, but something you can actually take and use today. And they offer a 21-page Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign frame in the same style of the campaign frames that you find in the Daggerheart core book. So if you want to see what Dungeons of Drakkenheim is all about and really get like an idea of like what the campaign would be about and what you could use, this is a really good example of the kind of material that you're going to get in that book. But also, it's kind of usable right now. Right? There's a lot of information. And here's something, they probably don't want me to say this, but they didn't talk to me about what I can and can't say. So, or what they wanted me to say or not say. If you already own Drakkenheim, because I already do, right? I have the 5e Drakkenheim book. You could probably use this and that book and mash together your own Drakkenheim setting. So obviously better if you're gonna take the time to run a Drakkenheim campaign using Daggerheart, and you have the opportunity to, I would pick this up. Pick up the Kickstarter and then wait a year and then run it when it comes out. But if you were like in the middle of one now, or you really wanted to run a Daggerheart Drakkenheim game today, you could do so with the old Drakkenheim book and this campaign frame, which kind of ties Daggerheart together and shows you what it's all about. But even better than that is digging into it and seeing the kind of material that you're going to get and learning about what Drakkenheim is all about. If you're not familiar with Drakkenheim. So very, very good, very good, clear sample, lots of useful material. And again, like material that you could use right away to talk to your group if you planned on running it. Lots of different stuff that you get, crazy dice tray, special dice, a special collector version of it, STLs for downloadable 3D printed stuff, GM screen, all that kind of stuff. The only part that kind of amused me was they offer a dice set. Where is it down here? And all kinds of different tiers. So they have all sort of special stuff, and they include a dice set, a resin dice set, but it's not a Daggerheart dice set. It's a normal seven die kind of set. And it really can you put another D12 in there that's a different color? Right? Is there a way to do that? Then they do. They have these special Fate of Drakkenheim gemstone dice, but those are significantly more expensive. So it would have been nice to have a set that was actually like the lower level set. If you buy that, I'm swimming in dice. I don't need any more dice anyway, so it's not a big deal to me. They're doing very well. There's lots of stuff that's going on here. I decided, because I already own the physical version of the 5e version, I myself backed the PDF version of it because I don't feel like I need 2 copies of Dungeons of Drakkenheim. And I tell you, if I was going to run it in Daggerheart, I would certainly buy the physical version of the book because I love physical versions of the book when I'm running it at my table. But if it's just kind of something I'm interested in or I want to kind of be inspired by or something like that, I generally back the PDF. So I back the PDF of this and it looks really good. So that is the Dungeons of Drakkenheim Daggerheart Kickstarter, available now. You can find a link down in the show notes for it. And it looks really good. Check it out. And check out that free sample. That's the best way to get an idea of whether that is a Kickstarter for you. Also in Kickstarter, Apocalypse World Burned Over. Apocalypse World may be the second most influential role-playing game of all time. I'm going to make that statement. There's probably other people who are like, actually, RuneQuest is definitely more influential, or Call of Cthulhu is more influential. That's possible. I could be wrong about that. But certainly the number of RPGs, big and small, who can tie their design back to some of the original design of Apocalypse World is really high. For example, the Avatar: The Last Bender role-playing game uses the Powered by the Apocalypse engine. Daggerheart has a lot of Apocalypse World kind of ideas in it. I was digging through the Daggerheart game again yesterday, thinking about it for my own campaign, and I was like, yeah, it was all these kind of things, the principles that are there, countdown clocks, all kinds of stuff that are taken from Apocalypse World. And so it's really cool to go back to the original Apocalypse World, see a new version of the original Apocalypse World that kind of started this idea of the Powered by the Apocalypse style games, which is sort of, multi-phase success and failure mechanics. You roll 2d6, on a 1 to 6 you fail, on a 7 to 11 you fail, or you succeed with a consequence, and then with a 12 plus you succeed with a boon, with a bonus, like that kind of thing. A very heavy focus on moves, character playbooks instead of character sheets that you have to fill out. A lot of interesting things that they did with Apocalypse World. And there's a lot of new things that they're doing with the third edition of Apocalypse World, which is known as Apocalypse World Burned Over. You can find a link to this Kickstarter in the show notes. I backed the physical, I backed the big one, right? I backed the physical. Oh yeah. So they have some really interesting rewards here for it, which I wanted to kind of point out because I really liked what they did. So one of the rewards they have is a reduced version. So this is specifically for people who are having trouble putting together the scratch to back it, but really want to back it anyway. The intention it's no questions asked, but if you're having trouble getting the funding together, but you want to get in on the Kickstarter anyway, they offer a reduced cost version, basically half cost version, $10 for the digital version of Apocalypse World, which includes the full game and the playbooks for the game. I thought that was a nice thing to do. The normal one is $20 if you're just interested in kind of understanding what Apocalypse World is about. You want to kind of understand the game. Maybe you're not like going to run it, but you want to kind of pick things up. Then the Apocalypse World digital version is $20. There is the Apocalypse World in print version. This is the most common one. This is $40, which includes the PDF plain text. So really good on them. I mean, I tell you, Meg and Vincent Baker, the creators of this, are really tuned in to the hobby itself. Right? Giving things out there to the hobby itself by talking about how they are perfectly happy with people building games that are influenced by Apocalypse World, hence the Powered by the Apocalypse idea. They don't have a license, which is interesting. They sort of have a declaration of their expectation of what you can do with it. That's really interesting. But they've been very supportive of that. The idea that they are now putting this book out and not just PDF, but also a plain text version of it, that makes it easier to read with screen readers. It makes it easier to put into Markdown and other formats so that you can have it on your phone. That's fantastic. And then the digital playbooks, and then of course a physical version of the book. So that's the one I would probably, if you're going to play it and you want a physical version of it, $40 I think is a really good deal. They have a retailer one, of course, but then I thought this was interesting, and this is the one that I ended up backing, which is the PBDA Creator Pay It Back. So a lot of people have gotten a lot of benefits from Powered by the Apocalypse, including me with Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master talks about a lot of the ideas that have been influenced from Apocalypse World. So this is my opportunity to kind of give back a little bit more to them than I otherwise would, right? This includes the main book, plus the regular playbooks and 3 extra sets of different kinds of playbooks, which they offer as add-ons. And then a little bit more to say, hey, I got value out of the work that you did in the products that I myself made money from, so I want to do that. And then for publishers, and I noticed that like Evil Hat Games back this, they have hey, if you are a publisher who has published for this. This is something where I think that Darrington Press, given the clear influence that Daggerheart has from Powered by the Apocalypse, I think it would be a really good sign. I don't know that they did. You can't really tell everybody who did the publisher pay it back. But I know that like if I had made a lot of money off of an RPG itself that had used Powered by the Apocalypse, I think this would be a good way to give back to Meg and Vincent Baker to say, thanks for creating Powered by the Apocalypse and for letting so many awesome games kind of spawn for that. Evil Hat Games, who has Blades in the Dark, Monsters of the Week, Thirsty Sword Lesbians, and other kinds of Powered by the Apocalypse style games, Band of Blades and others, they backed this version of it to kind of say, hey, this is our way to do it. I think that's really cool. It's kind of different than the sort of legal ramifications of licensing and stuff like that. Instead saying like, dudes, you got some value out of the work we did. You made some money. How about a little bit of money back? So I thought that was a really good, interesting thing. So I'm very excited about this. I'm excited to see the kind of new things that they added to Powered by the Apocalypse. I'm not sure it's the game that I want to run, but boy, is it a really fun game. So if you are not familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse or the Apocalypse World game, this is a great way to get into it. You can also find a lot of material online that shows you what it's about. But I think it is really cool, and it's really cool to see that Kickstarter, and I'm wanted to promote it. Also, Meg and Vincent Baker, along with Jonathan Harper. Jonathan Harper is the creator of Blades in the Dark, among a bunch of other role-playing games. All 3 of them were on Ben Riggs's Reading D&D Aloud podcast, which he admits is woefully misnamed at this point. But it was a really, really interesting interview with Meg and Vincent Baker talking about why they made Apocalypse World, how they made it, sort of the design constraints for it. Some interesting things like they really needed a game that they could fit into like an hour and a half or 2 hours and get really quickly started in the action because they had little kids at the time. Now, those kids are grown up and they're playing it, and they are all working together on this new version of Apocalypse World. So it's like they refer to it as a generational RPG at this point. So it was really kind of fun to hear their design ideas and hear Jonathan Harper talking about it, and the earliest days where they were going through how to create Powered by the Apocalypse games and some of the ideas that were going on there in the old Google Plus era. Really, really fascinating podcast. So I will link to that podcast as well. If you want to listen to Meg and Vincent Baker, the two creators of Apocalypse World, and Jonathan Harper, the creator of Blades in the Dark, talking about all of that design of this really, really fantastic RPG system. I highly recommend listening to that podcast. It was really good. Speaking of great interviews, Shannon Appleclein, who is a D&D historian, has written books about the history of D&D, was on Mastering Dungeons, the podcast with my two friends, Teos Abadia and Sean Merwin, talking about his new crowdfunding campaign for Designers and Dragons. I've already brought up the crowdfunding campaign. I will link to it again, though. You can find a link in the show notes to the Designers and Dragons crowdfunding campaign, where there are 4 books that dive deep into all of the product descriptions of products from like 1970 something until like mid 1990s. So if you want to learn more about like how did Temple of Elemental Evil get built and how did the B2 module happen, right? These are very specific things. So it's I haven't even finished the interview yet, but I'm deep into it and I really, really like the interview. It's really, really interesting. And one of the things I learned, which I thought was very amusing, because I was on a discussion this past week talking about the DMs Guild, right? And I have my own very strong opinions about the DMs Guild that many disagree with, and I'm not going to say that they are wrong. I think they're wrong, or I wouldn't be disagreeing with them. But we have big discussions about the DMs Guild. Not so much of whether it's a good place to publish now, because almost everybody that I talked to has said it is no longer a good place to publish because there's just not enough people there. But also about whether it was a good place to publish before. My argument is that because you signed an exclusive perpetual license for your material, you lost access to your own material, you had no access to customers, and you had a very high percentage cut. It was a 50% cut that went back to DriveThru RPG and Wizards of the Coast, that made it really hard to make a big success there. But many people said, yes, but it was the best access to 5e players that you could get, which is true. However, at what cost? So what's interesting, during the interview, Shannon Appleclein talked about the fact that in those days of the early DMs Guild and also the website called D&D Classics was when Wizards of the Coast started to put up PDFs of all of the old versions of D&D stuff, which is fantastic. And I have hundreds of PDFs now from them that I bought of old classic D&D material. I have, for example, like every set of the old core books in PDF. So I can look at 2nd edition and 3rd edition and 1st edition and BCMI and BX and everything else. It's really interesting to watch like the evolution of D&D by looking at some of these old products. I've used them in games that I've run. I've used them to kind of dig into the old style of the games, everything like that. So Shannon Appleclein was hired by, I think, Wizards of the Coast to or either Wizards of the Coast or DriveThru RPG or both, to write the product descriptions for all of these old classic D&D modules. And he said that he and Kevin Culp both did it. One of the interesting things is Shannon actually negotiated as part of his contract that he would get the rights back to those product descriptions. So unlike everybody else in the DMs Guild who did not get access back on any of the things that he wrote, Shannon actually owns the rights to the descriptions that he wrote. And it's those descriptions that he used to help put together these books of Designers and Dragons, re-editing and updating and everything like that. But he got his own original work back. I thought that was really interesting. Anyway, fantastic interview. You can check it out. You can also check out the Designers and Dragons crowdfunding campaign, which is still going on. So I think a couple months ago, I talked about a candle. I talk about Mike's Little Candles. Mike's Little Candles are the candles that I see either lit or unlit that are showing us whether or not Wizards of the Coast is being a good steward of the RPG hobby. Are they helping out the overall RPG hobby or not? I'm not going to go into the details of that. You can find it in previous episodes where I talk about like what are the things that they have done that show that they are being a good steward of the hobby, and what are the things that they have done that are not. What are the things we would like them to do that they have not yet done, things like that. Examples of good things are putting out the 5.1 and 5.2 SRD in the Creative Commons. That is a big help to the overall RPG industry. Putting D&D 2024 4, available on multiple competing platforms, including platforms where you can download it and own it permanently, like Fantasy Grounds and like Foundry. That is a good thing, and other things. One of the candles that had previously been lit and went out, or certainly was flickering, is educational resources. For a long time, Wizards of the Coast has had educational resource pages up where people could go and download class packets and other material to help run either during school or after school programs for role-playing game stuff, particularly for D&D. And for some reason, and we still don't know exactly why or what happened, those pages suddenly disappeared from the Wizards of the Coast website. Well, good news, they're back. So thanks to Jay Stardust over on Discord, the D&D After School Educator resource pages are now back. And you can find this is over on dndsupport.wizards.com. I will link to it in the show notes. So if you're running during school or after school programs, you can go download this stuff. And they have a bunch of different things that they offer. So they offer an education and resources page, which has a bunch of downloadable class curriculums. I don't want the cookies, thank you. So you can download this. Now, what's interesting is this page moved and is now under globalphilanthropy.hasbro.com. Right? And it's kind of a few different things, but it's definitely focused on Dungeons and Dragons, and it includes things like a D&D Beyond educator license. So if you're an educator and you want to get access to a license so that you can give access to the kids that you're running this for free material available on D&D Beyond, which includes different stuff, you can get it here. I did joke with my wife that I wonder if that includes a free pack of cigarettes along with it, because what are you doing? You're getting people addicted to D&D Beyond. But we're not going to get into that. I do think it's actually a good thing. That was just my little joke. Not super serious. So downloadable material that you can use, and also giving access so that you can give people access to D&D Beyond material, Dungeons & Dragons material on D&D Beyond for free. So it's really good to see that. The only question I have is, why am I finding this out from one of the people on Discord? How come there isn't an announcement on D&D Beyond about it? Why am I the one doing the marketing? Right? Why am I the one telling you about it? How come Wizards of the Coast doesn't have like a YouTube video where they talk about the educator resources? Say, hey, educators, here's what we're doing. I think like that's kind of up to them. To me, the candle is, yes, they have this stuff available. I'm going to put it, I have a educator resources page on Sly Flourish where I can link to stuff like this. I'm going to add this to those pages. And there are other groups. I work with Let's Quest, right? Michelle and I that work with the company Let's Quest, the group Let's Quest, to get RPG resources in the hands of educators as well. And I tell you, we talk a lot about it because we want people to use it. So it'd be really great to see Wizards of the Coast promoting the fact that they have these educator resources. So I don't know why they don't. I mean, even an article on D&D Beyond would be pretty straightforward to do. Instead, here I am doing a show segment on my show talking about their educator resources page, because I think it's important, because I think bringing the joy of tabletop role-playing games, the advantages that it has for bringing people together, for letting us break out of the other aspects of our lives and work together, I think is really important. And I think that Wizards of the Coast in particular is in a spot that a lot of us cannot be in to help bring this to the next generation of people. So really glad that they're doing that. Happy to see that it is back. And all I would say is, why don't you tell people about it? The One Ring. So Free League, outstanding publisher, Free League, has the One Ring role-playing game, which is a Lord of the Rings-based role-playing game, and they have done the Lord of the Rings 5e book. They didn't do a crowdfunding campaign for this. Some friends of mine and I were talking about why aren't they doing a crowdfunding campaign, but they are doing a pre-order for a new book of adventures for both the One Ring and for the Lord of the Rings 5e book. They actually have different names, which is a little confusing because I guess they don't want you to accidentally buy the wrong one for the wrong system. And it is a book of adventures set with the characters dealing with Saruman the White, kind of. And I can't remember if like you can work with Saruman or fight against Saruman. Anyway, instead of doing a crowdfunding campaign, they are doing a pre-order campaign for this. I just picked up, I actually have it on my shelf right behind me. I just picked up a copy of the One Ring. I don't really have a big intention to run it, but I've heard lots of really cool things about the One Ring, and with the recent licensing thing going on with Asmodee and Lord of the Rings, I'm a little worried about the One Ring license. I'm a little wary of how an IP license can get pulled back. And so This is one of those where like, now's the time. You want to get some good material for an RPG. I don't know that this RPG is going to be around forever. It will be around forever if we buy it and we keep copies for ourselves, which is what I did. I'm like, I want a physical version of the One Ring, and I have it on my shelf because I don't know that I'll be able to buy it forever. So I wonder if, like, you know, why isn't this a crowdfunding campaign? I know that Free League is running other crowdfunding campaigns currently, or they're in the process of coming out with some new ones for Dragonbane, for example. So maybe they don't want to do too many crowdfunding campaigns and instead say, hey, this is a book of adventures, so we will put this out as a pre-order as well. Right now, when you pre-order it, you get the PDF right away, and then they're going to do a print run later. So part of their intention is get you the PDF. You can read the PDF. If you see anything weird in the PDF, you can let them know before they do the print run, which I think is a smart move. So that is the Hands of the White Wizard is the one for the Lord of the Rings 5e version. It is called The Trials of Saruman. So similar sized book, but focused on a different system. So those are those two books, which I think is quite interesting. So I have been running a lot of high-level 5e games. I have 3 different 5e games currently going on. A tier 3, almost tier 4 D&D 2014 game. A level 20 D&D 2024 and 2014 and level up advanced 5e in one system that I call the 3x5e game. And I have a 10th level going on 11th level Tales of the Valiant game. So I've been running a lot of high level 5e. And the number one thing that has made running those games significantly easier for me is this idea called Dreadful Blessings. Dreadful Blessings is my renamed version of Doom Points from the Tales of the Valiant system. I've kind of talked about the beautiful mess of 5e before that. There's new 5e systems published by multiple publishers. They all have really good ideas. Many of those ideas have been released under open licenses, which means other games can pick them up. It means we can pick them up and distribute them. Originally, Doom Points were not released under any kind of license, so I just renamed the concept into Dreadful Blessings. But now Doom Points are actually under a Creative Commons license by Kobold Press, so you can call them Doom Points. You can do whatever you want. You could call them Doom Points anyway, but if I'm writing articles about it, I was a little nervous about writing a bunch of stuff about Doom Points when Doom Points themselves weren't released under any kind of open license. But now they are. I digress. So what is that? What is a Doom Point? What is a Doom Point? What's a Dreadful Blessing? For me, the way I have been using it, which isn't exactly the way that it is used in Tales of the Valiant, but the way I've been using it is that rather than using legendary resistance for great big boss monsters, I instead give them a number of Dreadful Blessings. Dreadful Blessings can do what legendary resistance does, but it can also do anything else. And I usually give significantly more Dreadful Blessings than they had legendary resistance. Legendary resistances are often limited to 3. It's not uncommon for me to give 4 and 5. I think I would do 3 at tier 2-ish, 4 at tier 3, and 5 at tier 4. But you can make a determination. You could even give more. You could give 6. You could spread them out across multiple monsters. You could do all kinds of things. And the key for a Dreadful Blessing is that I put them out on the table. I have physical coins or some kind of representation that shows these Dreadful Blessings. And I put them out on the table so all the players can see. And I will state it very clearly. When you look at this boss, you can see that this boss has 5 Dreadful Blessings, right? And the players go, oh, right? Because they all know what that means. So what can you do with Dreadful Blessings? Anything. Typically, for example, you can use them to automatically succeed on a saving throw when you would fail. But you can also do things like, even if you failed on a saving throw previously, you can now break the effect that is on you. You can do things like break away magical effects or anything that's kind of hit you. An example is, what if you're stuck in a force cage? You could use a Dreadful Blessing to rip out of a force cage. You can use a Dreadful Blessing to devour all the hit points from a minion and give it back to a boss. You can use Dreadful Blessings to give yourself advantage on your next volley of attacks. You can use Dreadful Blessings in order to recharge your breath weapon and immediately use it. You can use Dreadful Blessings to give yourself an entire other set of actions. There's lots of things that you can do with Dreadful Blessings. So really, you can use them for just about anything you want. But with great power comes great responsibility. While you can use them for anything you want, there's lots of things you shouldn't necessarily use them for. And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, the conversation that I'm having right now is because I have used them dozens and dozens of times now with multiple groups at different levels. So I've used them a lot. And the thing that they have done for me is now I don't have to worry about designing boss monsters to deal with the incredible array of unknown, super powerful character abilities that could completely circumvent a battle. right? That there's so many different ways, especially I have a 20th level game with 3 different versions of 5e going. There's no way I can know all the things that they can do, right? Blinding and stunning. I had them fight a monster the other day who was at disadvantage on all of his attacks, and they all had advantage on all of their attacks for the entire battle. They had so many ways to get it that it didn't matter, right? The monster was at disadvantage on every attack, and they were at advantage on every attack. Now, his attack bonus was so high, I think it was plus 17, it didn't matter. He was still hitting like crazy, and they were hitting like crazy, but he also had like 700 hit points, so it didn't really matter, right? But those are examples. There's just so many things going on in the game at that point that I can't keep track of the specifics, right? I can't know what's going on there, but I know that if he got pinned down from something, if there's something that's limiting the ability for this monster to behave as he should behave given the story, I can use Dreadful Blessings to bring him back into the story. I can have them do it. An example of something I did was I ran Demogorgon, right? It was actually one of that, this is a long story, but it was one of the heads of Demogorgon had taken control of the other head of Demogorgon, and the characters were battling essentially Demogorgon, right? And at one point, one of the characters was getting beat up a lot, and I think was down, and a mage, a necromancer, one of the characters, threw up a wall of force in like an igloo shape so that there's one direction in where other people could go into the igloo, heal up the person, kind of get ready, and without Demogorgon being able to do it. And he was like slapping his tentacle on top of it. So then, and he was doing legendary attacks and he was banging on it, right? And they're like, oh, that's good. Like, he's using his legendary actions, hitting this wall of force that he can't get through. And then on his turn, I'm like, he uses a Dreadful Blessing and he grabs it with his tentacles and he tears the wall of force open. And they're like, oh, right? Like now they're exposed. And now the healer is exposed too, right? That was an example of using a Dreadful Blessing to say, like, you're not going to be able to just put up a wall of force and avoid Demogorgon's sole range of attacks, right? Could I have designed Demogorgon to deal with stuff like that? Yeah. You know what's easier? Having a thing where I can just do things on the fly. That made it significantly easier. But when should you use them? And when should you not use them is a really important question. The tricky part is knowing how and when to use them. And it's a bit of an advanced RPG technique. You have to have a feeling for this kind of thing to know when and how to use them and when not to use them so that you're not doing these things. For example, you don't want to use them to take away agency from the characters. When the characters need to be able to do things. So if a character has spent an entire action to kind of do a thing, you don't want to just immediately get rid of the thing that they took their action on. However, if they have an asymmetric thing where they spent an action on it, but it removes a whole pile of actions from the monsters, let it eat up some number of actions from the monsters, and then they use a Dreadful Blessing to get the rest of their actions back. So a lot of times when we're looking at the effects that high level and characters have in 5e, they are eating up a disproportionate amount of resources with their resources. For example, let's say I have a monk and the monk punches somebody and does Stunning Strike and stuns that creature. If they only stun it for one round, you've essentially absorbed one action for another action, right? You took your action to remove the action from them. That's pretty reasonable. But if you're taking 3 actions away from them, or you're doing it on a boss and that boss has a bunch of legendary actions, right? That can be an issue. So it's important to recognize like what the value is there for the character. So you're not just getting rid of the thing that they want to do. But I'm going to talk about a fundamental problem, but we'll get to that in a second. Fundamental problem with how players look at bosses. So you don't want to use them to take away character agency. And that's a wide subject. So you really, you have to be pretty careful with it. You also don't want them, you want to make sure to use them so that the monster meets its intention in the story. That's what you're really using it for. You're not using it to get revenge against a player for their powerful abilities. You're not using it as a gotcha. You're using it specifically to ensure that when the monster that is in your story meets the expectation of that story, right? That's really what you're using it for. Because a lot of times the character abilities that are removing agency from the monsters have the reason why I know I get frustrated from that is because I had a feeling of what this monster was supposed to do in the story, and now it can't do that anymore. Right? That's a real issue. Dealing with use them to deal with the tremendous amount of high-level character BS that cannot be predicted. There are so many things characters can do. Spiking their damage, removing character agency, preventing movement, absorbing damage, all this kind of stuff that they do. Super high armor classes, resistance to everything. You can't keep track of it all. I can't keep track of it all. But I don't need to keep track of it if I have these universal get out of jail free cards, right? I can have a dragon who drops one of these and pierces through fire resistance when he breathes out a blast of fire damage. If I had had Dreadful Blessings, I wouldn't have to worry about Hero's Feast. I complained about Hero's Feast for a long time because it totally destroys green dragons. Turns out I could have just used them and broken through resistance if I had for that one monster. You still don't want to remove everything, but it can help. So it's a cheat card with a consequence. There ought to be a difficulty for the monster to kind of use it. They should still have to eat something when they use it. They shouldn't get just completely omit whatever the character ability was. Right? There should be some cost, and you kind of have to figure out what that cost is. A lot of time it's just action removal. They get one less legendary action because they had to use their Dreadful Blessing in order to shatter through the force cage or something like that. It's a really good way to keep your hand on the threat dial, right? But a lot of time when I'm running high level 5e games, I want to know that the threat is still there so that the players still feel on the edge of their seat, right? You don't want a boring boss fight. Right? You just don't want a boss fight that's boring. You want an exciting boss fight. This lets you keep up the pace. This lets you say, I have my single boss and I can use this thing and it works really well. So what are some examples that you can use them for? Saving on a saving throw. That's an obvious one. Ending an ongoing effect, maybe by letting the effect go on for a round or two. For example, you could blind a creature, right? And it's blinded until its turn. And then at the beginning of its turn, it drops one of these and now it's no longer blinded. So it's not reducing on its attacks, but you had all these free attacks in the meantime. Giving yourself advantage on all attacks. I like this one because a lot of time characters have a lot of ways to keep their defenses up. I have had monsters. I had a Marilith, right? So I had a Marilith queen who made 7 attacks on a round and she missed so often that I just said she now has advantage on all attacks. But I even did worse. I gave 3 up at once and let her attack 3 targets with all of her attacks. She had 3 different people around her. She did 7 attacks on one, 7 attacks on one, and 7 attacks on one. She did a bunch, 21 different attacks. All right. But she burned 3 Dreadful Blessings to do it because she had like 8 hit points left. And I'm like, she's using these 8 hit points. Impose disadvantage on an opponent's saving throw, but only within reason, right? You don't want to do this to steal agency away from them, but you can, for example, say like, the dragon breathes and you all have disadvantage on your saving throw against this breath, right? Particularly if you feel like they've been having too easy a time dealing with the breath weapon. Maybe you impose disadvantage on there, and then maybe you have the way that they have advantage so then it evens it out, right? That's a way to kind of bring that threat back. Change a damage type. I had a big dragon that they were facing, and he ripped off a chunk of rock from an arcane tower, and it let him change his breath weapon into things like lightning and acid and stuff like that. I actually didn't use Dreadful Blessings for that, but that would be an example where you could shift damage types by dropping in Dreadful Blessings. Absorbing hit points from a minion. I kind of like this one, that if you have a bunch of minions around the area, he can, especially if it's like any kind of necromancer or demon kind of entity, it can just tear the souls out of those living and give itself more hit points. This helps you with guys that are spiking tremendous amounts of damage. You can give them a little bit more hit points, but the characters know, oh, good, he's eating his friends. That's good. That way we don't have to deal with the friends. That works good. Healing, direct healing, you can do it, but I would do it sparingly because it's a really big downward beat when they are healing wounds. So I would be a little bit wary of that. Taking extra actions. I mentioned this before, right? Taking extra actions is a good thing. If you feel like the actions have been ineffective, you can use these to take even more actions. Moving without provoking. Bosses really ought to have this anyway. So maybe you don't even use a Dreadful Blessing for this, but boss monsters need some way to be able to move around and not get pinned down. A lot of time they should just have it. But if you want, you could use a Dreadful Blessing to give it that ability. Recharging abilities. If you got a dragon with a breath weapon, giving it a new spell, right? You have a high level spellcaster, they could use a Dreadful Blessing to gain a spell slot back and then use another big spell, things like that. Bringing threat to unthreatened characters. A lot of times, particularly if you have 5 or 6 characters, there are characters who aren't taking any kind of damage at all. You can use these to like spread damage out, to do things to people that otherwise can't be hit. This is a good way to use these Dreadful Blessings in order to bring that threat to people who are otherwise unthreatened. What should you not use them for? Revenge. It's really easy to get mad when the players are bringing all this stuff to the table and they're ruining your boss monster and you want to get them back. That's not why you should use them. You should use them because you want to bring the story. You want to bring the monster story to be consequential, right? You want to bring the monster story up to where it ought to be. Don't use it to take away character agency, right? Be really careful about just using Dreadful Blessings to eat things. That can be a problem. Eliminating the character's really cool thing. If they have something they did that or want to do that's really cool, don't just omit it. Don't just get rid of it because of a Dreadful Blessing. And removing a character's actions, which is similar to the removing character agencies. Like that's those are all important things that you ought to consider when you're using it. So, some examples where I use Dreadful Blessings and use them in great effect. And one thing I want to clarify, my players really like them. I'm shocked, right? Because they hate Legendary Resistance. My players have hated Legendary Resistance for years. Hated it. And lots of people hate it. Matt Colville has talked about how he hates Legendary Resistance. Flea Mortals are completely gone and replaced with other things, right? Lots of players hate Legendary Resistance. And I don't know exactly why, but they don't mind Dreadful Blessings. Right? They will joke about it. They're like, oh, it's the DM cheat card, right? They get to, but all of my players says, no, they actually are pretty cool. It's also the first time that I have seen players go out of their way to try to cast things in order to get them to use their Dreadful Blessings so that you can get rid of them. Because they know that those are threats to us. That's not just them getting rid of things. It's also damage that they're going to do our way. And we want to get rid of that. So they're really happy to watch them get burned down. Right? All of my players almost universally have said, yes, I prefer them to Legendary Resistance, even though they're kind of the same thing. And even though you have more of them, because they're fun to get rid of. And I know that, those are threats coming back in the other direction. So that was a really interesting insight. And again, I've been using them for a while now. I've used them for maybe a year, and people really like them. So some examples. My Marilith Queen. I had a Marilith Queen. This comes out of Fantastic Lairs, a fantastic book that myself and Scott Fitzgerald Gray and James Intercastle wrote. You can find it over on the Sly Flourish bookstore. It is a book of 23 boss lairs from first level to 20th level, and one of them, which is 16th or 17th level, I upped it a little bit, was against a super powerful Marilith Queen called the Blade Queen, and I had her protecting one of the soul vessels of Ozymandias, the main boss in my City of Arches game. Spoiler. And she was super powerful, right? She could summon blades and send them all over the map. She had an aura of blades that are around her, and she's hitting people with swords, and she could teleport from round to round, so she could go and attack people all over the map. But she was missing a lot, and she was really close to the edge of dead. And I said, bang, I'm going to use all three of her remaining Dreadful Blessings to make full attacks against every single character that was there. It was like 300 damage that she dished out. She dished out a ton, but she spread it around all three. I think one person dropped, and the other two were like, we have like 4 hit points left. And then they killed her. And like, wow, that was hard. Like, I can't believe she whipped out that much damage that quickly. That worked really well. I had a Fiendish Ancient Dragon, I mentioned this, who ripped apart a magic tower and used the pieces of the magic tower to change the damage type that he was doing by using Dreadful Blessings on that. He could also use Dreadful Blessings to break out of a banish. At one point they banished him, and then he used it to break out but fly by and breathe on them as soon as he got it banished back. That worked really well. Demogorgon tearing apart the Wall of Force igloo, right? I mentioned that one. Shattering things like Wall of Force, penetrating things that typically don't require a save is a great use for Dreadful Blessings, right? Removing or getting rid of the effects, that works really well. Now, here's the interesting one. This happened last Wednesday. My characters have been dealing with the Nameless King since level 1 for more than a year and a half. They've been talking about it, and they knew he was out there. They've been failing his cults. Eventually, he got released. He came back. He was renamed as Ozymandias. He got his name back as Ozymandias, and they fought him once and beat him, and it was really hard. And they're like, wow, he was really hard. But because the soul vessel's around, he's still around. And then he attacked again. This time, he had a Staff of the Magi. He had Robes of the Archmagi, and he had a Ring of 3 Wishes that he was using to summon meteor swarms and drop them on the city. The characters defeated his mount, a super powerful fiendish red dragon known as Zereth. That was an 800 hit point fiendish red dragon. They defeated that, and then they went to face Ozymandias. He started off by dropping a meteor swarm on them. Then a couple of the characters went up, and our barbarian went up, who has a Vorpal sword, and hit and rolled a 20, right? And everyone went, isn't that a Vorpal sword? And I'm like, it is. And they're like, oh my God, you just beheaded Ozymandias. He had all 5 of his of his Dreadful Blessings free to him. I could have used them, but I was like, that is so epic. That idea of going over and beheading the boss in the 3rd turn of this big battle. It was also the end of the night. I had expected that we were going to have the next session of them battling Ozymandias, but I'm like, we'll start it now. But I was like, this is so perfect. I think I'm going to not use the Dreadful Blessings. And my story reason for this was that Ozymandias had actually given the last tiny shred of his little black shriveled soul to Abraxas, the demon prince of Chul. And Abraxas had that soul in his magical scepter. And I already knew that there was going to be this kind of follow-on arc, because I wanted the characters to have some time at 20th level, to enjoy 20th level. I knew there was going to be a follow-on arc of going into Chul, facing Abraxas, and then destroying the last remaining soul vessel of Ozymandias for the final time. But I was like, you know what's cooler is you cut off his head. The soul, they see that the soul went off to Chul, because there was a big portal to Chul. They saw that the soul went off there. And they know Ozymandias is still kind of around, right? We defeated him here. They got, he had all this preparation, but it got totally destroyed by a Vorpal Sword. They already had all of his stuff. But I was like, well, now when they go to Chul, I can still have Ozymandias there, only now he is this bound servant of Abraxas. Now, little story element, Abraxas is actually killed by another super powerful creature named Vriss. Vriss killed Abraxas. Now Vriss has control of Ozymandias. So now when they face Vriss, they have to face Vriss and Ozymandias. Now, he won't have all of his special stuff. He's not going to have his Ring of Three Wishes. He's not going to have his Staff of the Magi. He's not going to have the Robes of the Archmagi. But now they have to face two bosses at the same time that are, one's a CR 30 and one's a CR 26 at 20th level, right? And I want to make it that they feel bad for Ozymandias. My goal is to show that he is like bound by radiant chains, and and then Vriss is like controlling him, and they're like, oh man, poor Ozymandias. Like, I want somebody to say that. I don't think they're really they hate him so much. I don't think that's gonna work. But now they get to face him again anyway. So I was like, I'm not gonna take away, I could use these dreadful blessings, but I'm not gonna take them away from the character who just got his rolled a 20 on a critical hit against a main boss. That he's going to remember that the rest of his life. And if I had taken it away by using a bunch of dreadful blessings, I don't think it would have been nearly as cool or impactful, and I don't think he would have remembered it. So that was an example of me restraining myself from using dreadful blessings. And everybody at the table was sure I was going to do it. They all said afterwards, I am amazed you didn't use the dreadful blessings. And I know what I said to them was, if his soul hadn't been bound to Chul, he would have used them, but he didn't have the chance, right? Because he died, because his head was cut off that quickly, the soul absorption thing happened faster than he could do it. So I even had a story reason for him to do it. So that was an example where I didn't use it. So I hope this gives you a good idea of like what dreadful blessings are, how you can use them, this sort of advanced technique on how to use them in your 5e games to give yourself some ability to control, not control, but to influence the feeling of the game, to make sure that boss monsters are staying, are maintaining the story impact that they should have without having to put a lot of extra work on yourself to redesign all of the mechanics of 5e. Every quarter on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Patreon Q&A. I post a brand new one every month. Patrons can post questions about RPG-related topics. Every week on Friday, I answer all of the current questions, and some of them I bring here so we can dive in a little deeper and talk more about these questions and figure things out. Ben C. says, I was wondering your thoughts / suggestions for starting a one-on-one game, one DM, one player. In particular, how would you run a session 0? You've mentioned that the Holmes-Watson style, but do you have recommendations on whether the players roll up both characters? Maybe the DM rolls up the supporting character? In my context, the player, my wife, has very little RPG experience, so I'm wondering if it'd help to introduce a support character later on once the personality and backstory of the primary is more developed. Good question. I think in this circumstance, if you're playing with a player who's not as experienced, what I would do is focus first on them building out their character and their story and what they want to do in the campaign that you're going to run. A big difference between one-on-one games and normal kind of, I don't want to say even normal games, because they're all normal games, but games where you have like a big group, is you have a lot more opportunity to tailor the entire story around one character. It's harder to do when you have 5 characters and they all have their individual stories and you're trying to figure out how to make something that brings them all together. It's much easier when there's only one character. So I would start by working with them on building their character and talking about the story of their character and the story of the world around them first. Then once you've done that, and this can still be part of your session 0, then I would probably build a support character for them and get their input on the support character, ask them questions and prompts, and build that character together with them, maybe from a story perspective and conversation, you from a mechanics perspective. But when you build that sidekick really is a sidekick. It is a supporting character, right? It is the character that is really shining the spotlight on the other character that's there. So this is the idea of like they're playing a fighter, you're playing a cleric. They're playing a barbarian, you're playing a bard, right? Really pick the classes that are support classes that offer a lot of benefits to the other person. That, be the healer, be the buffer, right? Focus on that. Don't be the one that's doing all the damage. Unless the other player kind of says, I want to be the one in back who's got like a frontline thing. Then your sidekick could be a barbarian. But the key is that the barbarian is not, or the sidekick is not the focus point of the story. The main character is still the focus point of the story. So I think working with your wife in this circumstance to build that character together, the sidekick together, after they've already built their main character, I think that's the way to do it. But as long as you have a key idea that the spotlight is on the main character that's being played by the player, and that the sidekick is really a sidekick, I think you're in a good spot. Liar says, I, like you, like cultists as antagonists, and in preparing to run the Collision of Worlds arc. That is awesome. The Collision of Worlds is one of the arcs from City of Arches. There's one thing I always struggle with, though. As a known connoisseur of cultists, I don't know if I'm a connoisseur of cultists. I mean, I like them. How do you explain the paradoxical drive of cultists who seek to summon an entity destined to annihilate both their world and themselves? Honestly, looking around today, I don't think that's too hard a motivation. Because it sure feels like we got a lot of real world groups that are happy to eat their own lunch, right? So I actually don't think that is too hard to stretch. And I don't think we have to think about it too hard, right? One of the things about cultists is like, their brains ain't working right? They've got some fundamental beliefs that are antithetical to logic and reason. So it's okay. But I have another interesting angle on this one. One of my favorite movies about crazy cults, which I don't recommend to everybody because it's a pretty harsh movie, is the movie Hereditary. Hereditary is a really interesting one. And I was listening to the director's commentary about Hereditary, and the director made a really interesting point. This is a spoiler for the movie Hereditary. So if you haven't seen it, you might want to skip ahead because I'm going to spoil part of Hereditary. But one of the things he said about Hereditary is, from the outside looking in, you're assuming that all these people are just crazy, right? They all just have these crazy beliefs. But the truth is, they're correct, right? They're right about it. They actually, there are these entities, right? There are these things, there are these beliefs. And in our RPG, they're not wrong, right? They actually have a creature that they worship that could give them some kind of power. Most of the time when you're talking about like following a deity, they're going to be the chosen ones, right? This is a common deific sort of idea and a common thing among cults. They're going to be everyone else are the idiots. We're the real smart ones, right? So like maybe they'll be given something else. But one of the things I've done, particularly for like apocalyptic cults where like everything is going to be destroyed, is they have faced so much pain in their lives. They just want everything to go away, not just themselves. It's not even just like a suicidal thought. They want everything to go away. They think existence shouldn't occur. And it doesn't have to make sense, right? But you can kind of say like that is sort of the way, that's sort of the way it works. So I think those are a few things that I keep in mind. But honestly, I don't really care that much, and players don't really care that much. So you don't have to do too much work to try to make sense of it. Sometimes it happens. I've definitely had players who are trying to have the cultists like explain to them their beliefs, and eventually like, yeah, you're just wrong, right? Like you're just weird, right? And that's okay, right? Comic book, one-dimensional cultists I think are fine, right? We don't have to have super deep, super rich motivation for every, dude in a robe with a wavy knife that's trying to stab you in the back. It's okay. But a lot of the times I would say sometimes they're correct, right? Sometimes the thing that they're working to do actually is true and actually will happen. Oftentimes they want to be the chosen one, and sometimes they're just broken people. And from an apocalyptic standpoint, it's essentially a suicidal tendency just scaled out to a much larger degree. Benjamin B says, I recently had an experience playing Shadow the Weird Wizard. Yeah, I can't wait to play Shadow the Weird Wizard. With regards to too much table talk. At first, there was a lot of table talk as we were learning the system, and that's totally fine. During the fourth quest, though, it became clear that a slide had occurred where my players had replaced rules-based questions and discussions with strategic ones. One player clearly felt left out while the other three plotted. I'm planning on talking to my group about it and asking that they try to stay in character during battles so we can have more exciting play for everyone. Do you have any other advice for helping players wean off table talk, especially during battles? Yes, I have some thoughts, right? And obviously we all have sort of different feelings on it. I think having a conversation with them is fine. I would also have them, try to bring in the other person. If you have, let's say you have 4 players and 3 of them are doing strategy talk and a 4th is kind of bored, you might work as a facilitator to say, Jack, what do you think of this? Right? What do you think of their plan? And kind of bring them in and maybe get the players to recognize, oh yeah, we could talk to them as well. If it's all just sort of like mechanical, tactically talk, then you might say like, let's try to stay in character a little bit more, because it's their turn. You don't really have the chance to kind of talk about it with them. You could have that, and you could have the out of game conversation. But the other thing that I would recommend is that idea of like, helping. GMs are in a spot where you have to do a lot of different things. Specifically, I was talking to another GM recently about this. Specifically, you have to do a lot of like player management stuff, right? A lot of people management stuff. And, we're not always the best people to do that, but that's kind of the role that we're stuck in sometimes. And part of that is facilitation. And facilitation really is trying to bring, and I'm not perfect at this by any means, but part of facilitation is trying to make sure that everyone is engaged in the conversation that's going on. Even if it's an out of game tactics conversation, it can still help you to kind of, prompt the players who are in the conversation to talk to the players who are not in the conversation, to kind of bring them on board. So it can be okay, right? Like that idea of kind of out of game tactic conversation can be fun and entertaining. If it's too much though, then you can talk to your players about like, hey, trying to rein it in a little bit or trying to move them along. And then the other thing to consider is how do you draw the player into the conversation? Nicholas Mahan says, I just ran my first game last week using Shadowdark with the Borderlands supplement. My players were a bit creative and smart in their adventure. They also rolled really well. Why I think everyone had fun. I was wondering what dials I can manipulate with Shadowdark to give my bosses some more fighting power. I'm thinking of trying to use Doom points for this, but would love your take on it. P.S. They sneaked around a lot of encounters and they did use a fair bit of their abilities. Maybe I'm just not familiar enough with running the game to really know how to best bring this out. I am not the best one to answer this because I am not what I would consider to be like deeply rooted into old school style stuff. However, running Shadowdark and running games like Shadowdark is a different experience than running games like 5e. I just did my whole talk about Dreadful Blessings and trying to keep the story of a boss in mind. You can do that in Shadowdark, but I don't really think that's what Shadowdark is about, right? Shadowdark isn't really about big, well-tuned boss fights. Shadowdark is about letting the world be the way the world is and letting the characters interact with it. About the only thing I would recommend and the only dial that you could consider is sort of the difficulty of the monsters they're facing, like in what the level of the monsters that they're facing and the number of those monsters that they're facing. And even then, there's a lot of times where you're rolling the dice to see how many monsters. And early on, you could roll really well and have a ton of really dangerous monsters. But there's a lot of other circumstances where you might have monsters that you think would be really hard, but they're easier because there's fewer of them or they happen to be lower level. So I think instead of trying to do things like Dreadful Blessings or trying to, use other techniques to soup up your boss monsters, I would try to think less about having boss monsters at all and having it be okay that named monsters or monsters that they got wind of, that they die quickly if the opportunity goes. But one thing I noticed about Shadowdark was as you start to get to higher levels, the power of the characters is actually pretty significant. When I ran my Ravenloft game recently, they were like +8, +9 to hit. They had really high attack bonuses, right? Because they had a lot of benefits. So it's a little surprising that at the high, and I think that was at 5th level, right? So higher level Shadowdark characters are really powerful. We spend a lot of time thinking about 0 and 1 level characters, but man, they get pretty tough at higher levels. They can still drop pretty quickly because they still don't have a lot of hit points, but they can still hit really hard. So I would think less about specific bosses and think more about the larger story going on and that the bosses are just part of it. I wouldn't try to build well-tuned boss fights the same way because I don't think that's really the intention. The intention is that the threat and the fear and the excitement comes from some of the randomness of the rolls that go on. Did you surprise them or not? Did you get surprised or not? Are there a lot of guys? Are there little guys? Are they super hostile? Are they actually just, not quite as hostile? There's a lot of circumstances that will come up that will matter later. Now, in my own Shadowdark game, and if you watch my old prep videos for it, you'll know I definitely had some bosses. Muggleblood was a big boss. I had a big dragon that was a boss for a long time. They killed that dragon really quickly, right? They used a lot of powerful abilities and killed that dragon, but they knew about the dragon for a long time. So I didn't resort to changing. I don't think I did. I didn't think I resorted to changing a lot of the mechanics. If things went a certain way, I just let them go that way. And I kind of think that that's the intention of it. So I would give that a try before I would start tuning the dials and see how that feels to you before I would start coming up with other systems on how to kind of beef up monsters or, do that same kind of manipulation that I'm willing to do in 5e. I wouldn't be quite as quick to do them in a game like Shadowdark. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, and you want more stuff like this, the best thing you can do is subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is totally free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator for signing up, and you get a weekly RPG-related article sent to your inbox with links to all of the other work I do. You can also become a patron of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, adventures, source books, all kinds of things to help you run your games. Hero tier subscribers get their own dedicated podcast, weekly podcast, plus access to a whole bunch of supplements that I've done for the City of Arches. You also get to, all paid patrons get access to our Sly Flourish Discord server where we talk about all things in RPGs all throughout the week. And most importantly, you help me put on shows like this. You can also pick up any of my books, including City of Arches, Forge of Foes, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, and The Lazy DM's Companion at the Sly Flourish bookstore. All the links for those are in the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.